Razer sent over the Kiyo Pro Ultra webcam for me to check out. This thing's a beast. It's got a huge image sensor, built-in AI features, and captures 4K video up to 30 frames per second. A lot of people are like, my laptop has a webcam, I'll just use that. Yeah, my laptop has a webcam too, and this is what the image quality looks like compared to the Kiyo Pro Ultra. Let's get this thing unboxed real quick. There's some paperwork on top, there's a setup guide in there, but you're not gonna need it because I'm gonna show you everything you need to know in this video. This is one big webcam. It's attached to this stand right out of the box, so there's nothing to do to put it together. It comes with a 2-meter long USB-C to USB-A cable to get the camera connected to your computer, and there's a cover that you can use to protect the lens when you're not using it. This is not what comes to mind when I hear the word webcam. This thing's the size of some lenses designed for mirrorless cameras. It's huge. It's basically made of 2 main parts. There's the camera body and the stand. The bottom has some grippy rubber. It's going to be helpful if you're sitting the camera directly on your desk. And this whole bottom plate's on a hinge. It can pivot so you can get the camera mounted as level as possible. The camera itself can actually tilt down a bit from the stand. So if it's sitting up high on your monitor, you can angle it down to where you're sitting. There's a 1/4-20 thread mount on there so you can get it attached to a tripod or other accessories. That makes it easy to set up for vertical video if you're going to be shooting that kind of content. You can also take the camera right off the stand and it's got its own 1/4-20 thread mount right there. So you can pretty much use this with any tripod or other accessories that work with regular mirrorless or DSLR cameras. Getting the Kiyo Pro Ultra set up is super simple. All you do is open up the stand and put this little piece that sticks out onto the front of your monitor. Then you just push the back part all the way to the back of your monitor to support the camera. Play around with it a bit, you want to get it as level as possible, and if you need to tilt it down a bit after it's set up, you can just hold onto the stand and pull the camera into position. It's got a built-in privacy shutter. It works by rotating the outside ring. 6 blades close and come together to block the lens. Looks like an aperture opening or closing. I know it's just a privacy shutter, but man, it looks super cool. The camera captures video with a big image sensor. It's just slightly smaller than a 1-inch type sensor that you'd find in some digital cameras. It's much bigger than what you'd expect to see in a typical webcam. The image resolution is 8.3 megapixels, and that might not sound like a lot, especially by today's standards, but you gotta remember, this is a webcam, which is a video camera, not a high-resolution stills photography camera. 4K UHD video is 3840 by 2160 pixels, which is about 8.3 megapixels, so that sensor resolution makes perfect sense. When talking about image sensors, generally bigger's better. Big sensors have larger pixels that are more efficient at gathering light, and that often results in higher sensitivity and better dynamic range compared to smaller sensors with the same resolution. So seeing that larger sensor in here means the Kiyo Pro Ultra should be capable of producing some very impressive images even in low light. The built-in lens has a wide aperture of f1.7, which essentially means it can open really wide to let in a lot of light. Wide aperture lenses are useful in low light situations because they allow more light to reach the image sensor, allowing for lower ISO or sensitivity, which means a clearer image with less noise or grain. The full frame equivalent focal length is 27 millimeters, resulting in a horizontal field of view of about 66 degrees. That means you can fit quite a bit into the frame without having to push the camera too far away from you. One of the things that really stands out to me with this camera is that because it has a big image sensor and a wide aperture lens, it can naturally blur the background. That means you don't have to mess around with any of that fake software blur that pretty much every other webcam relies on. You can get a much more smooth and natural looking separation from the background with this, and it's much more like a mirrorless camera than what you'd expect from a typical webcam. The Kiyo Pro Ultra can capture 4K video up to 30 frames per second and 1080p video up to 60 frames per second. And if you're on kind of an older or slower PC and you need to drop the quality down to get smooth recording, it can also do 720p up to 60 frames per second, and some resolutions even lower than that. Footage captured at 60 frames per second not only provides a high level of motion clarity, but it can also be slowed down to get a 2x slow motion effect when played back on a 30 frames per second timeline. It's a pretty cool feature to have in your toolkit as a content creator. Razer's using AI to track your face and drive the autofocus and auto exposure system. The idea here is that the camera should be able to do all the work for you when it comes to focusing and setting the exposure. The way it works is it defocuses for a split second and then snaps onto your face or whatever the subject is in the frame. That's why you can see a little wobble when it refocuses after I move around a bit. If you find that distracting, you could switch over to manual focus mode and just set the focus point yourself. Yes, I said manual focus. Don't freak out, it's super easy. Just go into Synapse, switch over to manual focus, and move the slider around until your face is nice and sharp. That's it. If you're sitting at your computer streaming, you're gonna pretty much be in the same place the entire time, so having a constant focal point is perfectly fine. The camera can zoom digitally from 1 to 4x. That's useful to help compose your shot without having to physically move the camera around. Just a quick note on that, you have to disable lens distortion compensation for this to work, otherwise the zoom option will just be grayed out. If you're wondering what that does, it corrects for the warping effects of the lens. You can see the lines at the outer edges of the frame here, they're slightly curved in this shot. When I turn on distortion compensation, the image crops in a bit and everything gets straightened out. It does have a built-in omnidirectional microphone. You're listening to it right now, so this is what it sounds like. If it's all you have, it'll get the job done, but it's not gonna be as good as a dedicated desktop mic. If you want to give your sound quality a boost, check out the Razer Siren V3 Chroma. That mic will make a pretty big difference in your content. I have a video about it that I'll link down in the description for you. You can toggle between auto and manual exposure. In manual mode, it lets you set the ISO and the shutter speed. If you want to capture realistic motion blur, you're going to want to keep your shutter speed set to double your frame rate. For 30 FPS video, you'd use 1/60th, and for 60 FPS, it would be 1/120th. In the processing tab, you can change the resolution, the frame rate, and set the quality of the video file. You can also just leave that on auto and tell it to prioritize either quality or performance. The HDR, or high dynamic range setting, will allow the camera to capture a wider range of detail from the darkest to the brightest areas. That's good for high contrast situations. It'll help prevent the highlights from blowing out and the blacks from becoming too dark. And there's a couple settings there to configure it based on the lighting in your room. Low light compensation will auto adjust the brightness when the lighting gets really low. You can play with the noise reduction if you want. I like to keep it on, but if you want to apply your own noise reduction in your editing software later, you can just disable it. That's actually a setting that some high-end video cameras don't even have. Under the image tab, there's some presets. You can click those and make some quick adjustments to the overall look of the image. White balance is set to auto by default, but you can take control of that too if you want to set your own white point. There's an anti-flicker setting. If you're in North America, you'll want to leave that on 60 Hz. You can add a watermark to your footage. And the last thing down here is a switch to mirror your video. You can switch that back and forth. If you want to get into content creation or streaming, obviously you need a camera. There's no shortage of options in the camera market. You can go with a full-fledged interchangeable lens camera system. That's the most expensive way to do it. Or you can look at something like the Kiyo Pro Ultra. It's a webcam, but it has the ability to deliver high-quality 4K video. If you think it's pricey for a webcam, well, you're not wrong. But when you compare it to a dedicated camera system, it's a massively cheaper option. It's gonna get you up and running quickly because it's a complete solution. It's a plug and play webcam. You don't need to understand lenses, you don't need to understand exposure, focus, or color science. The simplicity of it makes it a perfect option for non-camera nerds that want to be able to record some good-looking footage at their desk or live stream. And even if you are a camera nerd, it gives you the option to use manual settings in Synapse so you can take creative control over your video. Overall, the Kiyo Pro Ultra is a serious webcam. It delivers DSLR-like quality with the simplicity of a webcam. That makes it a powerful tool for streamers who want top-tier image quality without the hassle of setting up a DSLR or mirrorless camera. Purchasing links along with more specs and details are down in the description. Make sure you check that stuff out if you're interested. Get subscribed for more content, and we'll see you soon.